last time we kind of talked about why we debate, but this week I want to start digging into logic and digging into how we break things down and look at things in debate. This is recording. That's good. The other thing I want to do is go through some of the words that we use and step by step what a team policy debate looks like. So all the different speeches, the order of things, what it actually looks like to go through a whole speech. So you'll hear about affirmative speakers and negative speakers. So typically in a round, when we introduce ourselves to the judges, you'll say, my name is Jim Garlock, I'll be your second negative speaker or your second affirmative speaker. All that means is if you're affirmative or negative, you're either an affirmative teacher or a negative teacher, speaker, not teacher, and the order of how you're going to speak. So, and I'm going to go through the whole order, but if you are the first person speaking in the round, you are the first affirmative speaker, and then the first negative speaker, and then the second affirmative speaker, and the second negative speaker. So that's kind of the order of it. So you'll hear, if you listen to a debate, you'll hear everyone introduce themselves in that way. So if you're debating the F side, you're affirmative. If you're debating the neg side, you're negative. So how does the speeches actually work? The very first speech given is the first affirmative constructive, or the 1AC. That's commonly how you hear everybody say it, is the 1AC. The first affirmative constructive is that one speech that's written out. And it doesn't change from debate. You can change it from debate to debate, but it is your prepared speech. It's going to have your harms in it of whatever it is that the problem you're trying to solve. It's going to have your plan in it. It's going to have the advantages of enacting your plan. It's going to have all of those things in it. And that speech is 8 minutes long. So that's how the whole speech starts. After that speech, hey.
Do you have the Subaru Outback?
It's my daughter's.
Is she here?
No, she's
Oh, could you move it? Just because we're getting a tree cut down.
Yeah.
Just in case.
I don't have a key for it.
Oh.
And she left already, so I don't really have a way to move it.
Okay, we'll just pray then.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that.
Wait, right?
What? We'll work it out. It's all worked out. So that speech is 8 minutes long. Following that speech is cross-examination. So don't worry too much about the order of who's cross-examining who. I've got a way to figure that out easier than trying to memorize it. But after the first affirmative construction, there's a 3-minute cross-examination by the negative team. And then the negative team, their first speaker, will give an 8-minute speech, and that's called the first negative constructive. So all the first speeches are the constructive speeches. So constructive means you're building something. So in this first part, you're building up the case, or you're building up your negative arguments. The way you remember who is going to be doing the cross-examinations, whoever is speaking next is not cross-examining. It's going to be your partner. So if the first negative speaker is going to be cross-examining, or is going to be giving the first speech, then their partner is going to be cross-examining. When your partner is giving the speech, then you are cross-examining. So that makes a lot more sense as you get into the round and you practice it a couple of times. But that speech is also 8 minutes. And then we follow that format all the way through the constructives. So then, the first affirmative speaker, who is that same speaker that already gave the first speech, right? They are going to cross-examine. And then their partner is going to give the second affirmative speech. And so on and so on. So the next cross-examine, and then the second negative constructive speech. So this is like the first half of the round, all of the constructives. And then you get into what's called the rebuttals. So what is the difference between a constructive and a rebuttal? Through the first part of the debate, all four speakers get to give a speech, and during those speeches, the affirmative is building all of their case, and the negative is building all of the arguments against that case. So in the second half of the debate round, as soon as you get to the rebuttals, there should be no new arguments raised. So at that point, you basically set the path for what the debate's about at that point. The affirmative has brought up all of their arguments, so all of their advantages, all of their plan. They can't introduce new parts of their plan in the second part. The negative cannot start raising new arguments against it, because the rest of the round is going to be all about continuing on the arguments that have been raised at that point. Does that make sense?
Which one's the second half?
So this is all the first half, the constructives. So each speaker gives a constructive. So this is all the first half.
Don't forget about the last cross-section, so that, because that has happened 14 rounds of that.
Oh yeah, there's one right there, isn't there? Yeah, the last cross-section. So these are all the constructives, and then I'll go ahead and build this out. All of the constructives, and then it's all of the rebuttals. And the rebuttals are only 5 minutes instead of 8 minutes. So in the constructives, where you're doing all the cross-examinations, those are all building your arguments. And then in the rebuttals, you are basically defending your arguments. You can introduce new evidence. You can phrase things. You're not just going to give up and give the same speeches over and over again. But it should be, by the time you get to that spot, you've set the stage for what this debate is going to be. Yes?
I've seen in rounds, you have to be careful to bring up new evidence, because I've seen in rounds where the affirmative team doesn't respond to something, it doesn't respond to something, it doesn't respond to something. But then in their very last speech, they bring up the evidence that the negative team kept asking for. And it's really not cool because the negative team can't respond to it.
Right. And that's, so when we talked about ethics before, that's an ethical problem. You're right, you don't want to hold your evidence to the end. And your evidence should be more evidence of what you've already presented. It shouldn't be the first time you're presenting some evidence of something. Because if you're affirmative and it's the first time you're presenting some evidence, then probably what happened, unless you did that and held the evidence back, probably what happened is the negative team must have brought up a new argument if you have to bring up some new evidence, right? So that should never happen, should never need to happen. New evidence that you're reading in the rebuttals is additional evidence of something that you've already shown. If you have, we're going to talk about that a little bit, it's going to be your backing. It's going to be maybe another professor that agrees with you, or 5 more professors that agree with you. It's going to be your backing of something you've already presented. So this is the whole round. takes about 90 minutes. The only thing that I didn't put on here is your preparation time for writing your speeches. So at the beginning of the round, each team gets 5, right? Each team gets 5 minutes to write all their speeches. So the 1AC you already have written, so you don't have to use any time for that. And then as you go through, you'll get done with the 1AC, you get done with the cross-examination, and then the negative team would say, we're going to start our prep time. And you start a timer, and you have 5 total minutes, and you have to manage that 5 minutes for the whole round. So you don't want to take 4 minutes for this speech, because then you only have 1 minute for the rest of your speeches. So you're going to keep track of that as you go through the round. Yes?
So for the entire prep time for independent speech, you only have 5 minutes?
Yep. Between you and your partner, you've got 5 minutes to write your speeches. So that's where some of this stuff becomes important. So this cross-examination time right here, this is the next speech, right? During this cross-examination time, this person can start writing their speech. So you've got an extra 3 minutes before you have to start your timer, and you need to be listening to your partner as they're asking questions, because that may be things you want to include in. So you don't want to say, well, I only thought of one question. So even though I had 3 minutes of cross-examination time, I only took 30 seconds of it. You're shortchanging your partner on some of their free time they could have been writing their speech. So you want to be thinking of some questions.
So you can prepare the entire time somebody else is speaking?
Yep.
Including your partner?
And yeah. Anytime you're sitting at the table, you can be working on your next speech. You can be writing down, bullet points. And it's the kind of speech where you have evidence you're going to read. That's going to take up some of your time. But the type of the type of speaking during debate is more talking from bullet points than it is trying to, you're not going to be able to write out word for word a whole speech. So you're going to have concepts and ideas that you're going to speak to give your speech. Good questions. So time management becomes very important. It's common when you do your first debates that you take way more time than you thought you did, and you run out and you get somewhere down to hear the rebuttals, and you don't have any time left. But when you're in that situation, you just have to, as soon as they're done talking, you have to walk up there and give your speech. Yes?
I remember once my partner left all of the prep time until the very last speech and crushed the other team. That last speech was awesome.
So you just worked really
Yes.
quickly through your,
Yeah.
and I remember your debates, a lot of times you guys would work really quickly through the early speeches because you had prepared for what the arguments were going to be. You knew when you, and that's one thing that's really important. The more you study the status quo, the more you understand what arguments are out there, what plans are out there, and prepare for it, the less you need at the beginning, and the more you can really plan out good speeches at the end. I have to look and see how long that went before I quit. Okay, let's go on. We're going to talk about logic. So, what is logic? Here's a definition that, according to Webster, it's a long definition, it's a good one. Logic is the art of using reason well in our inquiries after truth and the communication of it to others. Correct reasoning implies correct thinking and legitimate inferences from premises, which are principles assumed or admitted to be just. Logic then includes the art of thinking as well as the art of reasoning. The purpose of logic is to direct the intellectual powers in the investigation of truth and in communication of it to others. So the purpose of this is to take information, and we're going to draw from that information and try to find the truth.
Jim's got a big favor, we gotta get your car moved because we're chopping down some trees and we hate to have an ornament on your car. Can you call your daughter?
She's like an hour away from here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was hoping she was gonna move it back here, but I see where she moved it, so.
All right.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a way to, and she's with somebody that's gonna drop her off back here
Oh,
to go home, so it's one of those deals.
we can just press it and get ready, maybe for tomorrow, chop it down.
Okay, all right, yeah, sorry about that, because she was talking about it, I didn't know about the tree, she was talking about it, because she was parked right on the corner.
Yeah.
And she said, I have to move my car because they're doing something with the tree. I said, okay, we gotta make sure you do that. But she didn't quite do enough of that.
All right.
All right. Where was I? Oh, logic. So logic is this. It's looking at information and putting it together to determine the truth, right? To pull it together and determine the truth. So, obvious question is, what is truth? We want truth in our debates. So we're gonna base the truth on what it really should be based upon. So truth is part of who God is, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and the Word of God are truth. All truth is God's truth. If something is true, it's because God created it to be true. So that's like a lofty definition of truth. As soon as you get anything below that, we could say, well, we think that this is true, but if it's not by God and from God, we can assume that it's true, but that is our standard. That is the highest form of truth, is what has come from God. So putting that all together, what are human reason and communication based upon? It's going to be based upon that truth. They're based upon the fact that God is logical, is a logical God, with the ability to communicate. Because he created humans in his image, we have those abilities as well. So we can use logic to sort out what is true. Now we know that God's truth is the highest level of truth, but we can use logic to put things together, draw conclusions, and try to discern the truth. The only reason we can do that is because we were created in God's image. God can do that, therefore we can do that. But it is a skill. It's not something that you necessarily do instinctually. Some people have better logic skills than other people without really working on it. But it is something in debate that we really want to take piece by piece and figure out how to logically look at things and logically explain things. If we don't explain things using logic, then it will be easy to debate against them. So why is it important to acknowledge God as the foundation of human reasoning and communication? Without God, the ability to reason and communicate can be lost. If reason and communication are viewed as human creations or the product of evolution, then these skills are subject to change and human fallibility. So, again, we don't go to this level in all of our debates and say we don't know if your truth is based upon the Bible, but as I explained last week, debate, if you do it for the purpose of just winning debate rounds, you're going to miss the point in understanding and learning these skills to actually communicate God's truth. So there are two types of logic, there's inductive logic and deductive logic. These are a little bit hard to understand. I took these out of the book. They're not great examples, but we can talk about what they mean. In team policy, we're using inductive logic. So it's from the particular to the universal. You're using an example of something, kind of small and applying it to something larger. So the particular to the universal. You're saying, in my policy, I have evidence that shows this happened in this situation. So if it happens in this situation, we're going to apply it to the bigger picture. It's based upon observations and it leads to probable truth. So that's inductive. A little bit less dependable, but it opens things up so that we can have conversation during debate. Deductive logic is the universal to the particular. So it's taking a very large truth and applying it to an individual situation instead of the other way around. It's based on strict formulas and it leads to certain truth. So deductive logic proves something to be true. So if you do like geometry and you do proofs, that proves this true every time. We don't, sorry about that. Stop. Go away. We're not able to prove something 100% of the time in team policy debate. We have to use inductive logic of drawing things together and saying, if this is true and this is true, putting those together, saying we can assume that this is true. You don't have proof that that is true. That would be deductive logic, more like in a science experiment where you're going to prove something. If you do find evidence that is deductive logic, that's almost impossible to argue against because something has actually been proven to be true. Here, I lost a page. Okay. So we're going to do an exercise, which I left across the wall. So in studying logic, we're going to learn a process. And this process, called the Tolman model. Still recording, but I'm going to stop and start it again. This process is a way that you can use logic to go through arguments that are being presented. And then you can take the arguments that are being presented and look at each individual piece to figure out, is this something that's true? Does it logically make sense? Probably in the next meeting, we're going to do some actual logic studies. So we're going to get to look at logical fallacies. You ever done anything with logical fallacies? They're fun. I think you're going to enjoy them. It's going through and finding the different types of fallacies that would make a statement untrue. There's a few examples in here we'll take a look at, but there's a whole list of them that we're going to study. So this Tolman model is taking a statement made, or like in TP, it's taking a plan or an advantage, or it's taking something and it's kind of looking at a whole speech and dissecting it and figuring out what is good about it and what is bad about it. The other thing you can use it for is in building your speech. You can go through and put your information in and make sure you have all of these things squared away and there's no logical problems in it. So the way this works, and I've got an example up here, you have a topic. So in this example here, the topic would be the topic would be walking, not driving, right? And the first thing you're going to hear is the claim, and what the claim is just that. It's what somebody is stating to be true, and it's usually some type of instruction, or it's some type. We should do this. That's the claim. We should, in this case, we should stop driving cars. That's this person's claim, and we're going to look at all the evidence that they're showing. But the claim for this one is we should stop driving cars. The claim might be we should increase the debt ceiling. That's going through Congress right now. We should ban something, fill in the blank. We should, that's typically in TP, it's going to start with that, we should do this, we should do our plan. So that is the claim. They are claiming that you should do a thing or you should stop doing a thing. The data is the information that's being given to support that. So that's the stuff that's backing it up. So in this example, the claim is we should stop driving cars. The data is the average temperature has been rising for the past 10 years. Well, you can see where this is leading. This is going to be like a climate, global warming type conversation that we're about to have. So we should stop driving cars. They have some data that shows the average temperature has been rising for the past 10 years. Those things, while in the speaker's mind, you can see where they're related. In the listener's mind, it's like you're saying we should stop driving cars, and you're saying that the temperature has been rising for the last 10 years. But you haven't tied it together for me. And that's what the warrant is for. The warrant bridges the claim and the data. So in a speech, you would say something like, this data shows that global warming is occurring, which is why we should stop driving cars. Now, granted, it doesn't tie it together very well. This is a really bad example on purpose. But your warrant is something that ties these two things together. So we're going to do an exercise in a minute where you guys are going to make a couple of claims, and then you're going to make up some data, and then you're going to use a warrant to tie those things together. The next thing is the backing. So that shows further truth about the warrant. It's gonna bolster your claim, right? So if in this situation, they had some data, they had some evidence, which showed why you should stop driving cars. Your backing is what we were talking about earlier, more expert opinions, or you went through and you logically put a whole thing together, and then in a later speech you have more evidence where there was a whole study done on it, and you have more information that you can share about it. That's your backing, so your expert's opinion. So in this case, Dr. Wiesewalk says that the internal combustion engine is the only source of greenhouse gases. Of course, that's foolishness, but this guy said it, right? So that's your backing. Now we have a claim, should stop driving cars. The average temperature has been rising for the past 10 years, and you've got a good piece of evidence that shows that, so we have to believe it. Your warrant is just a statement that ties those two together. And now you've got some nice backing from this expert that shows you why this is all occurring. It's because that's the only source of greenhouse gases. Okay, so that a lot of times, that's kind of as far as you'll go. We can get into qualifications and then conditions of rebuttal. So qualifications narrows the scope of your argument. You may have some evidence to show something, but you want the argument to be focused on a specific part of that. So instead of saying, talking about the global warming, you may only have data from a certain country, and you're going to try to control what happens in that country instead of in the whole world. This is described as, this narrows the scope of your argument. Experts that say global warming is part of a natural cycle should not be believed because people who believe in global warming say that they are wrong. So that's a really poor qualification, but that's the type of thing. It's like we're just talking about this, we're not talking about that. Here's the reason why we shouldn't be talking about that, because experts agree with themselves, is basically what that says. All of these things you're seeing here, we're going to come back to this, these are all logical fallacies that are built into this, so we can use this slide again. And conditions of rebuttal, remember we talked about the constructive and the rebuttal speeches. The rebuttal is when you are point by point arguing back and forth. So your conditions of rebuttal are the arguments against everything that was set up there. So if you're writing your own speech, you could use this to fill out all the information, and then you could write at the bottom, what are the arguments against this? So let's find some arguments. It should be pretty easy to do, which would be the conditions of rebuttal for this information in here. So we have a claim, we should stop driving cars. Our data says the average temperature has been rising for the last 10 years. That data shows that global warming is occurring, which is why we should stop driving cars. Is there a problem with that? Yeah.
Well, one thing they did tie together that cars cause it to heat.
Right. So there's nothing here that says, well, okay, it went up, but the cars, you didn't say that the cars drove. That's why I have some backing. Dr. Wieshenwalk says that the internal combustion engine is the only source of greenhouse gases. So, Lillian, what is the problem with that?
Well, I mean, who's Dr. Wieshenwalk?
Exactly. So if this said that, the head of, some big think tank or something like that said that, which they wouldn't, we do not have a trustworthy source in this. So as soon as that falls apart, now this claim doesn't prove that, and the whole thing starts to fall apart. Yes?
And with the average temperature has been rising for the past year, with global temperature, you need a bigger scope than that. Right.
So yeah, and these are logical arguments. So this is when I was talking about the inductive and deductive reasoning. All of these arguments are inductive reasoning arguments. We can look at this and say, well, that can't be true because that isn't true, and that's a bad source. That doesn't prove that at all. These are all inductive reasoning arguments. So this last one here, and it's a good argument. There's these big swings of temperature. If you look at the history of the world, we had an ice age, for goodness sakes, right? And then it warmed up. That's a bigger swing than what we're seeing here. This person is saying, experts say that global warming is part of a natural cycle. Those experts should not be believed because people who believe in global warming say that they're wrong. Right, this is a logical fallacy of circular reasoning is what that one's called, where the expert is agreeing with themselves, saying that the other person is wrong. There's not a logical reason for that. So all of these things would be conditions of rebuttal. So if you were writing a speech, let's say that this is the person's plan, and you were debating this, then in your speech, you would go through the things that we just talked about. Those would be your points that you're going to argue. And probably a month or so, we're going to go through what's called 4-point refutation, and I'll show you how to make a statement to very specifically refute each one of these things that's said. But the point of this model is to, if you just had a paragraph you were reading, or you just had a speech that you listened to, is to break down, you're always listening for, it always starts with the claim. It's like, what are they claiming here? What are they actually trying to say? So what I want you guys to do, you do a couple of them, because there's only 2 of you, is you guys, on the sheet that I gave you, pick one of these fantastic claims. So this is the topic, but it's actually the claim too, right? So pick one of these, and what I want you to do, and you can have fun with it like I did on the other one, is make up some information and fill in each one of those sections. And the sillier you make it, the funner it is. But each one of those sections, fill it in, and then we'll go back and kind of pick it apart and figure out what the logical fallacies are in there.
Are you timing us?
All right, Lil, why don't you?
I'm almost done.
Oh, you're almost done? All right.
So what are we supposed to do for the qualification?
You don't have to do anything for this one, but basically the qualification is something you would add to it that would narrow the scope. So well, I'm not even going to use that example, that's a bad example. That's a silly example, but it's a real one. If you were, let me think of a better example. It's where you take a claim and some information about the claim, but then you're going to narrow the scope of what you're talking about. So it's like picking one of the arguments that might be against your claim and trying to come up with something to just eliminate that argument before we get started. So in our policy for this year, it's talking about the convicted federal prisoner the system. So it's talking about the, all of the federal prisons. But let's say when you're making your argument, you state something, some claim, and you go through and you build out the data, you have some evidence, and you have your warrant and everything. But in your evidence, it's talking about how whatever it is, whatever your claim is, it's talking about how this piece of evidence only applies to men in the federal system. So that would be a qualification. When we're talking about this evidence, we're going to limit it down and just talk about, even the policy itself is the federal system. We're not talking about all the state penitentiaries. So if somebody else starts bringing evidence, let's say your plan might be to provide more daylight hours to federal prisoners because they, can get more vitamin D and they'll be healthier, something like that. And the opposing team has evidence. This piece of evidence that exists out there that says that they've tried it in the state prison system. So you try to head that off the pass by putting a qualification on there and say, that our scope is only the federal system, therefore any evidence that's brought up about the state systems don't apply. So that would be a qualification. That's not a great example, but that's an example. You may have something about languages, and you would say, well, we've got evidence that shows that we can bring this conversation down to only the English-speaking language, because this doesn't apply to other languages. We were talking about this.
Can you go back to the topic thing? I didn't write out the whole.
Yeah. There you go.
Personally, I think the moon should be colonized, though.
Should be colonized?
Actually, wait, no, I don't. I read a book where there was like a moon colony, but it was like really weird. It was scary.
Yeah.
It turned into supernovas. Yeah, you shouldn't colonize the moon.
Watched a movie where that's actually where Hitler went, and he went outside the moon.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those that was so bad you couldn't stop watching it. Like, what am I looking at? This is-
Wait, was that the one with the space guns when it should have like blown?
Yeah. It was like, shouldn't have been. Good? Okay. What topic did you choose?
Topic 5. Colleges should be required to train students to fight zombies.
Same one.
As did you, right?
Yeah.
That's classic. You guys are funny. So this will be interesting because you guys are both going to come at this. Well, hopefully you're going to both come at it from different directions. If you guys like literally have everything written down in your papers, then I don't know what I'm going to say about that. That's good. So let's go through this. Joyful, I'll let you go first. So what is your claim? Well, you already have your claim, right? So your claim was stated for you. So what evidence or what data do you have to back up your claim?
A zombie apocalypse is evident. It is imminent. Sorry. Okay, zombies can become a thing from radiation, vaccines, aliens, and the common illness stupidity.
Nice. Let's do it this way. What's your data?
My data is from Dr. Kilowatt on the 17th of October. Zombie fighting is good for the brain.
Oh, okay. So you have what we would call a harm, right? There's some harm in the current system that we need to take care of. And you're coming at it from an actual advantage perspective, that this is a positive thing that we can do. So, very interesting. Okay, Joyful, what is your warrant?
For humanity to survive the apocalypse, people would need to know how to fight zombies, and the best way to learn is through college.
Okay, so that's good. You have a claim that we should do this thing. You have data, which just kind of stands on its own, saying there's a coming apocalypse that's going to happen. And now your warrant is tying those together, and I like that you included the warrant of why should we do this? Because it's the best place to learn as college. What's your warrant?
You may think that zombie fighting sounds fun, but it's not very practical. However, the amount of zombies in the world is rising, and they will soon seek to take over society.
Okay, so that ties that together. What was your data again?
Zombie fighting is good for the brain.
Zombie fighting is good for the brain, and you tied that together. We should do this thing because it's good for the brain, and your warrant is tying those things together. Okay, you're backing. I can't wait to hear you guys' backing. Go ahead.
Expert astrologist, what's on top of us? Says alien life forms are likely real, and the possibility that they are zombies is about 3 in 25. A YouTube video showed that radioactive ice cream could cause a zombie apocalypse.
Excellent. So you've got, you went to the Holy Grail. You've got YouTube that's showing that this is true. Who can debate that, right? So excellent. That is more backing, more information to show you that your claim should be followed. What's your backing?
From Mr. Dude on the 42nd of June. College students make wonderful zombie killers because they need a safe environment in which to take out their aggressions. Right. So typically in your backing, you're going to be, a lot of times you're like quoting someone, which you both did. Either quoting someone or some other source. So yours was your YouTube, yours was Mr. Dude. The perfect one would be if you could get Mr. Dude to do a YouTube video, then you would really have it all pulled together. I think you guys maybe will get together on this and work this out. So I think you guys got it. So you understand how to go through these things. It's helpful doing it from a silly perspective because then you can go look at actual data. And because you created it, it's easier to go back to this now and figure out what the different parts are.
I included a condition with a button.
Oh, just one?
People learn better by watching YouTube.
Awesome. Did you have any qualifications?
I did.
Oh, you have a qualification. Let me hear your
I don't know if I
qualification.
did it, but experts that say college students shouldn't be trained to fight zombies are wrong. Because I asked my gerbil, he said squeak.
There you go. Perfect. So yeah, you're limiting an argument against it, or you're limiting the scope of what you're talking about. Let's say you guys got into a conversation about different types of zombies, and the zombies that you think you should be trained to fight are only a particular type of zombies, not all zombies. Because some zombies are so mean and ferocious that there's no way that college